I never thought I'd see a bear cry, but that day, I stood there, in our garden, watching it sit by my grandfather's grave, staring unmoving. And for a brief moment, I swear, it looked like tears shimmered in its dark eyes. It was late spring when I arrived at my grandfather's estate. I hadn't planned to visit, but he had called me out of the blue 3 days earlier. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but there was an urgency in it. "Logan, you need to come," he'd said. "I've found something, and I need you to see it." I parked my car at the edge of the long gravel driveway, the tires crunching softly. The estate was surrounded by blossoming apple trees, their petals drifting in the breeze like snowflakes. I hadn't been here in years. The house still stood grand and proud, though the paint was peeling, and the windows looked tired. I stepped out, stretching after the long drive. Before I could knock, the front door creaked open, and there he stood, Grandpa George. Older, thinner, but with the same sharp blue eyes. "Logan," he smiled faintly. "Come. I want you to meet someone." "Someone?" I followed him around the side of the house, past the greenhouse and the overgrown herb garden. We stopped at the back, where the old shed stood, and there, lying on a blanket beneath the shade of an oak tree, was a bear cub. I froze. "Grandpa, what the hell? Is that a bear?" He chuckled softly. "It's a cub. Found him 3 days ago. Poor thing was alone, crying in the woods. Looked like he'd lost his mother." I stared. The cub was small, maybe the size of a large dog, with matted brown fur and a thin frame. It blinked up at us, then lowered its head back onto its paws. "You brought a wild bear home?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Grandpa knelt down beside the cub, gently stroking its head. He wouldn't have survived out there. He was weak, starving. I couldn't leave him. "You could have called animal control or a sanctuary," I argued. He looked up at me, a sadness in his gaze. "I know, but something about him couldn't let him go." He reminded me of myself, I guess. Old, tired, alone. I didn't know what to say to that. Instead, I crouched down a few feet away, watching as the cub closed its eyes under my grandfather's touch. "Have you named him?" I asked quietly. "No," Grandpa replied. "I didn't think it was right. He's not a pet. He's just a guest." That evening, over dinner, I tried to convince him again to call a wildlife expert. He shook his head stubbornly. "Logan, he's safe here. Let's see how he does." But I worried. A bear wasn't a cat or a dog. Could grow dangerous. Could hurt him. The next few days passed in a blur. Every morning, Grandpa would go out with a bowl of milk mixed with honey, coaxing the cub to drink. I watched from a distance as the cub slowly began to trust him, inching closer each time, until one morning I found the cub curled up beside Grandpa's chair on the porch. I couldn't deny it. Something about them together felt right, like two souls who'd found each other at the edge of loneliness. Still, the risks gnawed at me. What if he turns on you, Grandpa? What if he grows too big, too strong? Grandpa waved me off. "Logan, I've lived a long life. If he ends up hurting me, well, maybe that's just how it was meant to be. But I don't think he will." One afternoon, I sat with them in the garden, watching bees drift lazily among the flowers. Grandpa was brushing leaves out of the cub's fur. The cub shifted, resting its head on his knee. And then it happened. Slowly, cautiously, the cub lifted a paw and set it gently on Grandpa's hand. Grandpa smiled, looking down at the small paw resting on his wrinkled skin. "See," he murmured. "He trusts me." I swallowed hard, feeling something tighten in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't scared of the bear. For the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, Grandpa was right. That night, as I lay in the old guest room staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking of that paw on his hand. A simple gesture, and yet it carried so much weight. I didn't know then how fleeting that peace would be. I didn't know that soon, everything would change. But that day was the beginning. Spring crept deeper into the world around us, and every day, the garden grew greener, louder, more alive. And with it, Grandpa changed too. I hadn't seen him move this easily in years. His steps were lighter, his laughter louder. It was like the cub had breathed youth back into him. I woke up early one morning to the sound of Grandpa's voice outside. Peeking through the window, I saw him in the garden, tossing a small, deflated soccer ball toward the cub. The bear blinked at it, confused at first, then cautiously patted closer and nudged it with its nose. "Come on, buddy," Grandpa encouraged. "Push it." The cub gave it a stronger nudge, sending the ball rolling a few feet. Grandpa clapped. "Good boy. See? That's how we play." I came outside, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "You're teaching a bear to play soccer now?" Grandpa chuckled. "Why not? He needs to learn trust, Logan. He needs to learn joy." Every day after that, they had their routine. Breakfast for both, then hours spent outside. Grandpa showed the cub how to chase the ball, how to roll on his back in the sun, how to dig harmless holes in the soft earth instead of tearing up flower beds. It wasn't training in the strict sense, it was more like friendship. And the cub responded. Slowly, his wary glances faded. He'd approach Grandpa without hesitation, lean against his legs, even let him scratch behind his ears. Once, I watched as the cub fell asleep on Grandpa's feet while he sat reading on the porch. At first, I was nervous. I kept my distance. But one afternoon, I sat beside them on the steps, and the cub ambled over, sniffed my hand, and rested his heavy head on my knee. I froze. Grandpa grinned. "See? He's chosen you too." Days passed like that, quiet and oddly peaceful. Grandpa started waking up earlier, tending to the garden again, humming as he worked. He seemed stronger, happier. The sadness that once lingered in his eyes was gone. But of course, not everyone was thrilled. Started with a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor from down the road, standing there with her arms crossed. "Logan, I don't mean to intrude, but is it true your grandfather's keeping a bear?" Her voice dripped with concern disguised as politeness. "It's just a cub," I replied cautiously. "He found it alone. He's taking care of it." She pursed her lips. "Well, people are talking. They're worried. That thing's going to grow, you know. It's dangerous." I thanked her and closed the door before she could say more. But over the next few days, I noticed more glances from passing cars, more whispers at the market when I went into town. "They're scared," I told Grandpa over dinner. He shrugged. "Let them be. People fear what they don't understand. But he's harmless, Logan. Look at him." The cub was lying under the kitchen table, paws tucked under his chin, snoring softly. Still, a quiet worry took root inside me. I knew Grandpa meant well. I knew the cub wasn't aggressive, but the world outside wouldn't see it that way. Then, one afternoon, the routine broke. I came back from a run to find the back gate wide open. The ball sat abandoned near the porch. Grandpa was searching the yard, calling. "He's gone," Grandpa said, breathless. I turned my back for a second, and he slipped out. Panic rose in my chest. "We need to find him, before someone else does." We split up, combing the estate. I checked the greenhouse, the shed, even the old well. Nothing. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows. Then I remembered the old oak tree. Grandpa always said it was the oldest thing on the property, standing alone at the far edge of the garden. I ran. As I crested the small hill, I saw him. The cub sat beneath the oak, staring up at its gnarled branches. His small body looked even smaller against the massive trunk. I approached slowly, heart pounding. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. He turned his head, eyes meeting mine. For a moment, he just watched me. Then, without fear, he rose and walked toward me, pressing his head gently against my leg. Relief flooded through me. I knelt, wrapping my arms around him. Grandpa arrived moments later, out of breath. He sank down beside us, resting a hand on the cub's back. "He wasn't running away," Grandpa murmured. "He just wanted to remember something." I looked at him, confused. Grandpa gazed up at the tree. "This tree, your grandmother loved it. We used to sit here every spring." Maybe he felt that. Maybe he wanted to be close to that memory. The cub yawned, curling up between us. And for a while, we sat in silence beneath the old oak, the three of us. It was the first time I realized this wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about saving something inside Grandpa, too. The days grew warmer, and the garden burst into color. Tulips lined the pathways, wildflowers filled the corners, and the air smelled of fresh earth and blossoms. But even as everything around us bloomed, I started noticing small things about Grandpa. He moved a little slower. Sometimes, after tossing the ball for the cub, he'd lean against the porch railing, catching his breath longer than usual. His laughter still rang out, but sometimes it trailed off, and his eyes drifted far away. "You okay, Grandpa?" I asked one morning as we sat on the porch, sipping coffee. He waved me off with a grin. "Never better, Logan. Never better." but his hand trembled slightly as he lifted the cub. The cub had grown, too. Not by much, but enough that his playful pounces carried more weight. Still, he remained gentle. He'd roll onto his back in the grass, swatting lazily at butterflies, or curl up under Grandpa's chair in the afternoons, his eyes half closed, peaceful. Grandpa spent more time in the garden that week. Sometimes he'd just stand there, looking out over the flowers, the trees, the distant hills. I'd catch him murmuring under his breath, words I couldn't quite make out. "Everything okay?" I tried again. He smiled, but softer this time. "Just making sure it's all ready." That afternoon, he invited me and the cub down to the oak tree. He brought a blanket, a thermos of tea, and a photo album. We sat beneath the sprawling branches, the cub resting his chin on Grandpa's lap. "Your grandma and I," Grandpa began, flipping through the pages. "We spent every spring here. We'd watch the blossoms fall, count the birds. She loved it out here." I listened as he told stories I'd never heard before. About their first picnic, the time they planted the apple trees together, the day she found a stray kitten under the very same oak. The cub nuzzled his hand, and Grandpa chuckled softly. "Looks like he's listening too." But by the time the sun dipped low, his voice had grown faint. He leaned back against the trunk, closing his eyes. "Grandpa," I touched his shoulder. He opened his eyes slowly. "I'm just tired, Logan. Just tired." That night, the house felt unusually quiet. The cub lay curled at the foot of Grandpa's bed, refusing to move. I stayed up reading, the soft hum of the night wrapping around me. But then, a thump, faint crash. I jumped up. "Grandpa," I called out, rushing down the hall. I found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, a broken glass at his feet. "Logan," he whispered, trying to steady himself. "I'm fine. Just lost my balance." I helped him back to bed, his skin cool and clammy under my hands. "We're calling the doctor tomorrow," I said firmly. He smiled weakly. "Tomorrow, then." But in the early morning light, I found him on the floor beside his bed. The cub sat beside him, silent, unmoving. My heart pounded. "Grandpa!" I called an ambulance. The paramedics worked quickly, their voices calm but urgent. I followed them to the hospital, the cub left behind at home, watching me through the window as I drove away. Hours later, the doctor approached me in the waiting room, a soft, regretful shake of the head. "I'm sorry." I sat down heavily, the weight of the words sinking into me. When I returned home, the cub was sitting outside the bedroom door. He didn't move as I approached. He didn't look up. He just sat there, staring at the closed door, waiting. And for the first time, I realized he understood more than I ever gave him credit for. The day of the funeral was warm, the air heavy with the scent of blooming lilacs. We buried Grandpa under the oak tree, just like he wanted. The same tree where he'd told his stories, shared his memories, and where the cub had sat with him, listening in its quiet way. I stood beside the small gathering of neighbors, holding back tears as the minister spoke gentle words. The cub sat at the edge of the group, watching, silent and still. He hadn't left the garden since the day Grandpa died. When they lowered the casket into the earth, the cub rose and walked forward, sitting at the very edge of the grave. His dark eyes stared into the hole, unblinking. He didn't move as the soil began to cover the wood. He didn't flinch at the sound of the shovels. After everyone left, I remained under the oak, sitting on the grass. The cub stayed by the mound of fresh dirt, his head resting on his paws. I tried calling him back to the house, but he didn't respond. "Come on, buddy," I coaxed. "Let's go inside." He turned his head slightly but didn't move. I placed a bowl of water near him, then sat back down, unsure what else to do. Days passed like this. Every morning, I found him there, guarding the grave. Every evening, he curled against the earth as if trying to feel closer to Grandpa. Neighbors started coming by, standing at the fence, whispering. "Is that the bear he raised?" one asked. "I heard it hasn't moved since the funeral," another murmured. Some brought food scraps, tossing them over the fence. Others just stared, shaking their heads. One afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins showed up again. "Logan, this isn't normal," she said. "That animal's grieving, but it's still a wild creature. It needs to be somewhere safe." I sighed. "He's not hurting anyone. He's just mourning." But the murmurs grew. People started asking more questions. Some worried about safety, others about legality. A week after the funeral, a man from the local wildlife agency showed up. "We heard about the situation," he said kindly but firmly. "We can take him to a sanctuary. He'll be well cared for." I looked at the cub, still lying by the grave, his breathing slow and steady. "I don't think he'll go willingly," I said. The agent approached carefully, holding out his hands. "Let's try." But the moment he stepped closer, the cub rose, letting out a low, deep sound. Not aggressive, not threatening, but protective. "He doesn't want to leave," I told him. "We can't leave him here forever, Logan," the agent replied. "It's not safe." They brought a crate, treats, soft ropes. But as soon as they tried to guide him away, the cub pulled free. He bolted back to the oak tree, sitting firmly beside the grave, refusing to budge. The agent sighed. "He's unusually loyal." Neighbors gathered at the fence again, watching. "I think," I said quietly, "he's made his choice." That night, I sat on the porch, watching the garden in the moonlight. The cub was still at the grave, a silent sentinel. And for the first time in days, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Grandpa had always said that love leaves traces. And here, in this garden, beneath the oak, love had left its mark. Quiet, steady, unwavering. Weeks passed. The garden shifted from vibrant spring into the soft edge of early summer. But every morning, the same sight greeted me. The cub, still at the foot of Grandpa's grave, waiting. Each sunrise, he sat there, facing the oak tree, his dark fur blending with the shadows beneath its branches. Each sunset, he curled against the earth, his breathing slow, steady, as if guarding something no one else could see. I stayed at the house. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. I kept up the garden, watered the flowers, trimmed the hedges, swept the porch. I watched over the estate the way Grandpa once did, though it felt emptier now. Every so often, I'd bring food and set it a few feet from the cub. He never ate while I was near, only after I'd gone back inside. He wouldn't come closer, wouldn't meet my gaze. Neighbors stopped dropping by. The whispers faded. Life outside the garden moved on. But inside, everything stood still. One evening, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sky burn orange and pink. I spoke softly, even though I wasn't sure if he was listening. "He always said kindness doesn't disappear," I murmured. "It circles back, finds a way." The cub's ears twitched. I remembered Grandpa's words from long ago. "Every act of care leaves something behind, Logan, even if you don't see it, even if it takes time." The next morning, for the first time, the cub wasn't lying against the grave. He stood a few steps away, watching me from under the oak. I stepped outside slowly, my hands open at my sides. "Hey, buddy." He didn't run. He didn't growl. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. Another, and another. My heart pounded. I didn't move. He stopped a foot away from me. Our eyes met. Then, carefully, cautiously, he lifted his paw and placed it against my hand. I let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight, the warmth of him. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm still here." He lowered his paw and turned, walking back to the grave. This time, he lay down facing me, not the oak. I walked over and sat beside him, the grass cool beneath us. The breeze stirred the leaves above. The sun slid behind the hills, casting long shadows across the garden. And as we sat together in the growing dusk, I realized I wasn't alone. I realized I never had been. I looked at the grave, then at the cub, his steady breathing beside me, and I understood. They had both left me a garden, full of memories and silent love.